Welcome to Leatherbrain, the podcast for fantasy football. Now, introducing your host, Hunter SlapDawg Amaruso, and Matthew Scotty Holtmeyer.
Welcome in to Leatherbrains, episode 101. Your host is always SlapDawg, and I am joined here today. It is Wednesday for those live, Thursday for those that are listening on the podcast. We have Yeti here at the studio, virtually, of course, because we don't live in the same place.
Not yet.
But he's here nonetheless. Not yet. We will one day. It will be glorious. Again, we used to. Yeti, we got a lot to talk about today, of course.
Yeah, man. Super Bowl week.
It's Super Bowl, baby.
Super Bowl. It's kind of bittersweet because it's the last game of the season.
It is.
And then we don't have shit for 7 months.
I know. Well, it was already, and I don't know how you felt. I felt like a big part of me was missing on Sunday. There was just no, yes, there was flag football, but like it's not real football. And as the degens that we are, we like to bet on games and we like to get very involved in the happenings of games. And it left a void in my heart that I had a feeling was going to be missed, but it still hurt nonetheless. I don't know.
You mean to tell me you didn't degen into any glorified pro or flag football game bets or anything?
I didn't. No.
Come on, man.
I am absolutely not going to be betting on flag football at the Pro Bowl. The Pro Bowl, as we stated last episode, is absolutely a joke to begin with. I would not try and bet any sort of money that anything crazy would happen there. It was an absolute joke. So, no, I was pretty sad, though. It was the first week without football, and we have one more game, the Super Bowl. So we're going to talk about that today and give our preview there. And then we're also going to talk about some fantasy football there, Yeti. Because if you did not hear at the intro, this states Leatherbrain, all things fantasy football. So, of course, we have to be talking about fantasy football today. So we're going to talk about the wide receivers. I think this is the last section that we have not covered as sort of our recap of sorts of this last season. So we're going to go over the top 10 wide receivers versus the ADP versus where they finished at. So you have your top 10 wide receivers. Of course, the names like Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson are all going to be on there, but did they finish where they should have, and where may have they finished instead? So we're going to talk about that as well. So Yeti, I think more than anything else, it's time for us to just get down to business and talk about the Super Bowl.
Let's get down to business.
That took me a second. I almost missed the drop there because we have all of our dropper audio sounds from the last episode. If you have not listened to episode 100, you are missing out on comedic gold. It was absolutely a blast to record. We did an award show for fantasy football superlatives. I highly suggest go listen to our last episode on whatever podcast platform that you listen to podcasts at, because there was a lot of laughs. There was a lot of things that may not be appropriate. We're on there as well. So, and you get to see some awards, and it was all chosen by you guys, the brainiacs who voted. So I highly recommend you go do that.
My wife did appreciate my Jimmy G comment about
she agree with
him taking care of her.
She was all on board for Jimmy G as your selection for her.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think so. She liked the fact that he wouldn't break her and that he would take her out to dinner.
Nice wine and dine kind of guy.
Yeah, exactly. But aside from that, I don't think she was too pleased.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was only 5 options, so I think you probably
the best one, babe.
Yeah, I don't hate that at all. Let's talk about the Super Bowl, Yeti.
What about it? Chiefs are just gonna win it, and that's it, right?
Okay, let's not get it. We're not a Chiefs podcast. Let's not get too crazy. Some are calling this the Kelsey Bowl. Some of us, including ourselves, I know I have repeatedly called this the Kelsey Bowl, but there is rumor that Mama Kelsey, there's actually a petition going around. The mother who birthed both of the Kelsey brothers, there's a petition out there that trying to get her to flip the coin for the coin toss. So let's start there. You have a brother. Neither of you are NFL players, but if you were, how cool would you like that? Would you want your mom to flip the coin for the game between you and your brother?
Selfishly, yes. I think that would be the most badass thing. And to have, there's obviously a shit ton of photographers there. To have that moment captured for the rest of your lives is like, what are the odds of that happening?
They
have to be slim to none. Like, you would be I feel like you could win the lottery before something like that happens.
100%. And I, if you don't listen to New Heights, they were, she was on there. That is the Kelsey Brothers podcast, and they had her on there, and we're kind of talking about it. So go tune into that. It was pretty cool to listen to, but really cool. Like, I mean, the chances of this happening are so slim. This has not happened before. What a cooler way to commemorate that than have your mother come out and flip the coin. I would be all on board for that for selfish reasons.
Did you see what she said about the petition?
I did not see what she said. No.
So her response to the petition was that, she's honored that people think it would be, a cool thing to have her flip the coin, but she's like, I didn't give any blood or sweat to this game. Like, I'd rather have somebody who has earned the right to flip the coin. So like a former player or anything.
That makes me want her to do it even more. Like, it's like reverse psychology. And she's like, I don't deserve to do this. And I'm like, get her in here.
But if they ask me,
she needs to do it. Like, and she kind of alluded to that in the podcast. She said something very similar. And I was like, damn. And then one of the brothers is like, don't discredit what mothers do. Don't discredit the blood and the sweat and the tears that mothers give to get us here. And I was like, damn, that's a good point. So I love her for saying that. It makes me have even more respect for her. Get her in. I want to see Mama Kelsey flip the coin. I would be all on board for that. But most importantly, Yeti, who do you have winning this game?
So I have the Eagles winning 31-21.
31-21. Okay, Eagles are taking home the cake. Eagles over the last 9 games, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith have both averaged almost 9 targets per game and each over 80 yards receiving. Miles Sanders is better than his 11 touchdowns and 1,200 yard show. Hurts has stolen 13 rushing yards or touchdowns this year. They have a great offensive line.
Yep.
They have a great defensive line, and they are in the top 3 in interceptions, and they are number 1 in sacks. This team is absolutely stacked everywhere. The best offense the Eagles saw all year was Dallas, who threw for more than 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I guess my question here and all of this information that I brought to the table is, you have the Eagles winning this game. Do you feel as if very obviously you think that the Eagles are the better team, but do you think that their schedule has slightly inflated them to the point where they've gotten here?
You can make an argument for that, I suppose, but at the end of the day, the NFL is full of professionals who deserve to be in the NFL. A win is a win in the NFL, no matter how it comes. And these guys are getting it done. They're not out here losing to teams that they should beat. They are getting the job done, and they are controlling the games. It's not like Dallas was a slouch either. Dallas was a playoff team that they beat. The Giants were a playoff team as well that they have beat. So they've beaten playoff teams, obviously during the regular season. But at the end of the day, everybody knows. Any person in the football industry knows that the Eagles truly deserve to be in the Super Bowl, because this is the most complete team in the NFL.
I agree. Let's flip the script though here for a second, because the Chiefs, as we talked about the Chiefs a lot in this offseason with the departure of Tyreek Hill, Patrick Mahomes has broken the total yards record this year with less than a stellar of a cast supporting him. Of course, you have Travis Kelce, right? And Kelce, he finished his regular season with 500 more yards than the next tight end. And he also leads tight ends in receptions and touchdowns. So you have Kelce, of course, but you have Juju Smith, he is outside of the top 20 in receiving yards. You have MVS, who is the other addition to this team, and MVS is number 44 in receiving yards. But then you have Aaron Jones. He leads the league in pass rush win rate. And then
Chris Jones.
Or Chris Jones, excuse me. I apologize. And then you have Kansas City's defense is in the bottom 5 in the QBR allowed, but they're in the top 15 rushing win rate, which is above average. So this team is not offensively stout. I think what makes this team offensively stout is Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that last week, right? So like what are you looking for? What are the Chiefs going to have to do to stay competitive in this game, in your opinion?
What's crazy is you just said that the Chiefs aren't, offensively stout, but yet they are the top scoring team in the NFL. It's the Chiefs, and then the Eagles are the top 2 scoring offenses in the league, which is crazy.
That is
Like, could
crazy.
you imagine if they had Tyreek on this offense? So, like, I think we would both be sitting here like, I don't fucking know who's going to win this game. Like, it could be a complete toss-up.
Yeah.
But I think what's going to have to happen for the Chiefs to win this game is they are going to have to play their best defensive game that they have played all season. We know Patrick Mahomes, he is still dealing with this high ankle sprain. I haven't seen a lot of talk about that on social media, and it's not like that's all of a sudden going to go away in 2 weeks. You know, like if he takes the wrong step, that ankle is going to buckle and he might be in trouble. Something that the Bengals did better in the AFC Championship than the Bills did is they got after Mahomes and they forced him to run out of the pocket a little bit. But the Chiefs offensive line held their own. They did a pretty good job. Now I'm interested to see how this offensive line responds to arguably the best defensive line in the league, with Reddick and then Hargraves and Sweat. How are they going to protect Mahomes? And Sue, of course. But the Chiefs are going to have to protect Mahomes, and they're going to have to play their best defensive game to win. I think the Eagles, they just got to do what they do. They have to make the game ugly in the early part of the game. They have to run the ball like they have been, control the line of scrimmage rather, and run the fuck out of the ball like they have been. They were the best rushing offense in the league this year for a reason.
Well, and Jalen Hurts, I think, is a large portion of that reason. There was reports, Andy Reid obviously has stated that Patrick Mahomes is not 100%. He came out and said that. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. He had said that Patrick Mahomes is not 100%, but Reid was still very happy with the way that they practiced this week. I believe that report was on Monday. So I think, and I'm curious as to your thoughts, like is very obviously, we know Patrick Mahomes is going to be the focal point for this team, but do you think that this offense still is going to look different like it did last game that they played? Because if you look at that team, if you look at what Patrick Mahomes was doing, Patrick Mahomes is notorious for spreading the play with his feet. That did not happen last week. If you saw, or not last week, the week before rather, you saw him against the Bengals. He was checking it down a lot and often to his running backs. They were getting out of his hands rather quickly. Do you expect that to still be a part of their game script in large?
100%, man.
Okay.
And we've seen that Hardman, he's going to be out for this game. He played a small portion in the game in the AFC Championship. But we also have MVS. Isn't he banged up a little bit? And Juju, I believe, is also banged up, right? So they're dwindling down even further into the wide receiver room. So I think, there's going to be a lot more checkdowns. We'll probably see a lot of Pacheco and McKinnon in at the same time, just to give Mahomes more options.
I'm there for it. I'm a huge Pacheco supporter. The guy, looks like he plays on drugs.
Yep.
So I'm there for it. And you know what? I had the Eagles winning this game as well. You have the Eagles winning. What was it? I apologize. 31-21?
Yep.
Okay. I've got the Eagles winning this 31-20. So we're right on point with each other there. And I think that that's going to be the case. The Eagles, we're not a Chiefs podcast, and we don't have any Chiefs fans here in the studio. So we can talk about it without any bias being thrown in there. And you know what? I say that jokingly, but even one of our other members of the team, Alan, also has the Eagles winning this, and he is a Chiefs fan. So the only person who's riding with the Chiefs is Scotty, because Scotty is a ride or die. But I think large in part, and I don't know what the Vegas odds are, but I'd be willing to bet the Eagles probably.
Yeah, Eagles are 1.5 favorites as we speak. Would you be surprised if the Eagles won by like 14, 21 points? Would that be a
21 is a stretch, but I think I could see 14. Here's what it comes down to for me, and as I kind of alluded to in the conversation previously, this game is going to be Patrick Mahomes. Can Patrick Mahomes stay healthy and play all 4 quarters at the highest level possible? Obviously, he's not 100%, and that's problematic, but I think that's what it's going to come down to for me is, can Patrick Mahomes not? I mean, he takes one wrong hit in that ankle, the game changes drastically. And so I think for that reason, does his offensive line get him as much time as possible, given the fact that he is not 100%? And what does Andy Reid do to game script the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hand quickly? Andy Reid is one of the best coaches in the NFL, so that's going to be his game plan. But I'm like you said, this is one of the most difficult defensive fronts that the Chiefs have seen, and one of the most complete defenses in the NFL, very obviously, because they're in the Super Bowl. So that's going to be a key component for me. Is what you asked, could I see this game getting out of hand? I could. Do it, out of the gate? Do I? No, but this is in large part going to be dependent upon Patrick Mahomes' health.
Yeah, and I think the only real question mark I have with the Eagles in this game is the play calling. Can I trust Nick Sirianni to call the right plays at the right time? Because Andy Reid is a master of playing chess, and he will outclass Nick Sirianni in a heartbeat. So he's going to have to hold his own this game, and he has to be willing to adjust the game script if it gets a little crazy. He has to make things ugly, and if he doesn't, Andy Reid is going to outclass him in every way possible. So I think that is where the Chiefs have the real advantage, is the execution, the play calling, and then obviously Mahomes. Like, those are their key factors to winning, and they just need to do what they do, and that's get the ball out of Mahomes' hand in a hurry.
I wish Mahomes was healthy. I wish he was healthy, because this game would be so much more interesting for me. Not that it's not going to be interesting, don't get me wrong, but like, that changes the whole narrative of this game, in my opinion. And from a coaching perspective, I think that's a really large component of it, is what would happen if he was healthy. So I wish he was. Obviously he's not, and me wishing and praying is not going to change anything. And I'm not a Chiefs fan, so best of luck to either team. I'm excited to watch the Super Bowl. Do you have any Super Bowl plans? You going to be doing anything?
So I will be in San Francisco with my wife this weekend. I believe we're just going to find a nice sports bar. So if you are in San Francisco, let me know where to go.
I won't be, but all the brainiacs out there, let Yeti know. All right, let's move on to our wide receiver conversation. So we're going to be talking about fantasy football, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. That is the staple of this pod. And we need to talk about the wide receivers, because we've talked about the quarterbacks in previous episodes, and we've talked about the running backs, but now is the time to talk about wide receivers. So we're going to talk about the top 10 wide receivers on their ADP. So these are the top 10 wide receivers that were drafted in fantasy football versus where they actually finished. Did they finish where they should have? Did they finish better or worse? And who finished in their stead if they did not? So let's kick things off here with the 6th overall pick in fantasy football, Yeti. The most dominant Triple King champion in fantasy of 2021, Mr. Cooper Kupp. 6th player off the board, first wide receiver off the board. Cooper Kupp had a very stout season the year before. He did not this year, Yeti. In fact, Cooper Kupp is one of the worst candidates to have drafted. And if you drafted him, you were very disappointed. Cooper Kupp finished as wide receiver 23 on the year. Very unfortunate. Obviously, for everybody knows, Cooper Kupp, he got injured, and then his season was over after that. So Cooper Kupp, he only played 9 games, right? He did not play anything outrageous. When he was playing, he averaged 22.4 points per game. It is insane. It is absolutely nuts. But what is more insane to me is Cooper Kupp played just a margin over half of the NFL games this year and still finished as wide receiver 23. Is that just not absurd to you?
That's insane. I think it just goes to show you how dominant he is when he's on the field, man. If he would have stayed healthy, he's easily the wide receiver 1. Over Justin Jefferson if you average out, the rest of the games or whatever. But my goodness, it seemed like it was just yesterday when we were trying to make a case to not draft Cooper Kupp because Allen Robinson was going to be the next hot thing in this offense. And Matt Stafford was going to fall off a cliff, which he kind of did. But I think he would have played if Cooper Kupp was healthy and that the Rams were more competitive. But
is that why you think Cooper or Matt Stafford there was like talk of him maybe coming back and then he didn't? You think Cooper Kupp being out played a part in that?
I think so, and I think them realizing that they don't have any shot to go to the postseason as early as they were eliminated is kind of like, what are we playing for? Like a lot of things had to work out when Stafford got hurt for them to make the playoffs, and I didn't think they were a playoff caliber team. So I think Stafford kind of sat out and rested like he should have.
Sure.
But let me ask you this: with Cooper Kupp missing time and him having surgery and everything, do you think he's still going to be a first-round talent next year, or do you have any concerns with Cooper Kupp?
That is something I've struggled with quite a bit to like just thinking about it. Cooper Kupp is 29 years old. So
Yeah,
like a part of me is like, he's getting kind of old. But then I say that and I think that he was still absolutely dominant when he was on the field. Like you just stated, like he still finished a top 25 wide receiver playing half of the game. So yeah, I think he's got to be. I think when he is on the field and I say this with an asterisk, and Matt Stafford is playing, because I think both of those, you have to have both of those for the fantasy football output that you are hoping with Cooper Kupp. So if both those guys are playing, and they should very well should going into next season, Sean McVay is coming back, so everything is there for them. Cooper Kupp's a top 3 wide receiver in my opinion. I don't think that changes for me. I think he just hopefully this, and I'm curious to see what beat reporters say as the offseason goes on and his health and these things, but top 5 easily. Like there's no way that he's not a top 5 drafted wide receiver. Is he the first one off the board for me? Probably not.
Yeah, I think that's Jay Jet's pretty. I think
it's got to be. And Justin Jefferson, he is the person that finished as wide receiver 1. So there was only a disparity of 2 picks between these two players. So Cooper Kupp was the 6th overall, and Justin Jefferson was the 8th overall pick. And he finished as the wide receiver 1, finishing with 21.7 points per game. So Cooper Kupp still finished with more points per game. The issue was Cooper Kupp got hurt, and Justin Jefferson played all of the games. But beyond that, Justin Jefferson was an absolute talent. He was the 2nd wide receiver drafted off the board, and he finished as wide receiver 1. And I think as we go through this list and we start looking at some of these players and discussing some of these players, it's incredible how I don't know who makes the ADPs. I don't know how they figure it out, but they're pretty spot on for a lot of these wide receivers. I'm not going to say that about every player, but like a lot of the NFL script writers must have passed it over for those ADP creators because gosh dang it, they're right on par here. So
that's how these ADPs are determined, man. You didn't get the script on fantasy football? Come on.
Son of a gun. It is. It's incredible. So Justin Jefferson, he finished as the wide receiver 1 overall. Like I mentioned, he was drafted at the 108. So you were not displeased drafting him, and realistically, the value's right on point there. So like you weren't upset. You got your value out of that draft pick for sure. So you got to be happy with that.
Yeah,
is Justin Jefferson 1st overall next year for you?
You could very well make the case that he should be number 1 next year. It's going to be, I think, a toss-up between him, probably Eckler, even though we probably don't want to have that conversation right now. I think Eckler's there, and Christian McCaffrey. I think those are the 3 guys that are really going to be targeted for the 1st pick, and I don't think you can go wrong with any of those guys as of right now. But it's fun to watch Justin Jefferson, man. This is a guy in his 3rd year in the league now, just finished his 3rd year, and he's just getting started. Like he's going to dominate the league for the next at least 5 years. And
let me ask you this. Kirk Cousins, he's probably going to come back, but right now it has not been determined. If Kirk Cousins leaves, does that change it for you as far as 1st overall pick?
No. He is a generational talent, and I don't care if you put Derek Carr as his quarterback. This dude is going to flourish, and I think he's going to be a top 5 wide receiver for at least the next 5, 6, 7 years, man.
Okay, then he's your 1st off the board. Who you should have drafted at the 108, Eddie? The guy that there was so much skepticism around, there was a lot of worry and concern with him leaving the Chiefs, is none other than the cheetah himself, Tyreek Hill. He finished as the 2nd overall wide receiver. How silly were we? How foolish were we that Tyreek Hill was, he was drafted at the 209, so end of the 2nd. He was wide receiver 7 overall off the board, and he finishes the wide receiver 2. We laughed at Tyreek Hill. when he said Tua has the best arm in the game. It's way better than Patrick Mahomes. We said Tyreek's going to fall off a cliff. Can they both live with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill in that system? Turns out you can. Because Tyreek Hill finished, like I said, is wide receiver 2 overall, putting up 20.1 points per game. And he did play for all 17 games. So have to be happy with the performance by Tyreek Hill, right?
Oh, yeah. I don't think any of us on the Leatherbrains team, aside from Allen, because he wasn't with us for postseason or offseason, but I don't think any of us expected this to freaking happen, man. We were saying that Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle is going to be a back and forth every week. Like, where are they going to finish? Because it's like they're both target dominant guys. But Tyreek, he really made us eat our words, and he's the true yard after catch king. As much as I hate to say that, he is, man. You could throw him a 5-yard slant and he's going to take it to the house for 80 yards. Like, it was fun to watch him, and I hope Tua stays healthy next year. I hope everything with his brain is okay, because he is a key to that offense. You know, we saw what happens when you put Skylar Thompson or God, what's the back? Teddy Bridgewater. It just doesn't look the same, man. So that's going to be the key to Tyreek's success next year.
Well, I think, that's a really good point that you bring up, is I think that it's very impressive to me that he finished there, given the ailments that they had at the quarterback position, because that has been the constant struggle for them for a large portion of the year. Tua has missed, I don't even have the number in front of me, but he's missed a good portion of the games due to all the amount of concussions and the rehab you have to take it easy after you have a concussion and getting through that protocol. So that to me it speaks about the true athleticism and talent that Tyreek Hill is to finish at wide receiver 2, given the fact that you don't even have your starting quarterback in for at least probably a quarter of the year, is fair to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me ask you this real quick. Tyreek Hill or Cooper Kupp next year? Who would you rather have?
Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
Cooper Kupp. You agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. Yeah, I just, we talk about the Matt Stafford and him. Yeah, it's more than breakfast. I don't know if it's lunch. I don't know what it is.
They make their beds together. They pick out their outfits together. Yeah.
Yeah. They're it's like stepbrothers. And that Dale comes in and they hate each other, and then all of a sudden they probably didn't ever hate each other, but then they become best friends. And that's what has happened since Matt Stafford has gotten on the Rams. He's just hyper targeted, and for fantasy output, it's insane. The concerns that I have with Tyreek Hill, because I think Tyreek Hill and Cooper are roughly the same age. I'd have to.
Tyreek is 28. Cooper is 29.
For me, the concern is Tua. Because Tua has shown, and you can't predict injuries. We don't root for injuries, but that's one of the concerns for me is, what happens if he gets another concussion? What happens if he gets another concussion next year and then comes back and gets one more, and then they say, look, for medical purposes, you can't play anymore? That is a concern to me. And then what happens? The entire Dolphins team, the rest of their season is not nearly on as great of a trajectory as it was with Tua at the helm. That is a concern. So, and for that reason, I'm going to take Cooper Kupp. Not only that, I mean, that is one concern, but Cooper Kupp is also he's a fantasy dominant player because Matt Stafford, he just hyper targets him. So I'm not going to be pissed if I end up with either. Don't get me wrong, but if I had to choose, I'm going to take Cooper Kupp.
Yes, I agree.
Alrighty. Third overall wide receiver off the board is Mr. Jamar Chase at the 110. So for everybody, we used a 10-team ADP draft here. So at the 110, 10th overall pick, Jamar Chase, second-year wide receiver for the Bengals. He was supposed to be the third overall wide receiver this year, and yet he did not hit that margin. In fact, he was wide receiver 11 on the year, so he was right at a top 10 contention. Finished with 18.7 points per game, which is pretty great, but he only played 13 games. So, once again, you want to talk about somebody who was dominant when he was on the field for fantasy purposes. Jamar Chase was that guy. He just missed a couple games due to injury. So Jamar Chase, he would have easily cracked the top 10, even if he was in for one more game. I think that could have been the case there. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, he did get injured. So you weren't mad drafting Jamar Chase? You were just disappointed at times because you wanted to be frustrated. Yes.
Yeah. It was frustrating because he missed time when you needed him the most, which was towards the end of the season when you're kind of fighting for seeding.
Mhm.
You're fighting for wins. You're trying to figure out your way to the playoffs. Yeah, he was a frustrating Owen because he would have, those big games and then he'd come back down to earth for a little bit. And then he'd have a big game and then come back down to earth.
And it was, and fantasy this year was, it was a lot different. It felt different than years past, as far as like there were so in leagues that I'm in with my friends and you guys, and leagues that I'm in with other people. Like it was a weird time for fantasy because everybody had competing teams at all times, just because of the weird way, statistically, offensively for the NFL, it was down this year in comparison to other years. So like you didn't get as much offensive production out of players that you assumed you would. And so yeah, it was very weird. And like you mentioned, like Jamar Chase, he was somebody that you were counting on to help you maybe slide into the playoffs, and due to injury, he may or may not have. So Jamar Chase, he a top 5 wide receiver for you next year?
Oh, yeah. I think he has to be. With how many targets he sees in that offense, yes. And with his skill set, I think he can put up 40 points any given week. Now, every week, like I was kind of alluding to, he's very hit or miss, very inconsistent in my opinion. But I still draft him first, second round pretty easily.
Let me ask you this. There is a rumor, and I don't know if it's true or not, but beat reporters are stating that if the Bengals and T. Higgins cannot come to an agreement on a long-term deal, they will trade T. Higgins this offseason in order to gain some value for him before he goes off into free agency. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. But some beat reporters are stating this. If T. Higgins gets traded and he goes elsewhere, is Jamar Chase the number 1 overall wide receiver off the board for you?
I still take J Jets, but I would take Jamar Chase number 2 easily. Okay. The dude saw 155 targets this year with T. Higgins in the lineup. He's going to see like 180, 190 if T. Higgins is gone. And with that kind of volume, you have to eat that up. And he would easily finish as a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 if he stayed healthy with that kind of volume. So give me Jamar Chase.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Who you should have drafted as the 3rd overall wide receiver is none other than the brand new shiny toy for your team, Yeti. The Raiders wide receiver, Davante Adams. He finishes wide receiver 3 with 19.7 points per game. He did play all 17 games. I don't know. Here's my thing. I own Davante Adams in a couple of my leagues, and I didn't feel like I had the wide receiver 3 overall in the year, because there were times where like he would spike and have insane, incredible fantasy football performances that would carry you to a victory. And then the next week he would put up like 7 points and you're like, dude, I could have started Curtis Samuel and he would have done better for me. So it was somewhat sporadic, but overall, I think the spikes certainly helped carry you to a lot of people to championships, but it was sporadic at times. So I don't know. Did you own any shares of Davante Adams?
I did not Well, yes, I did actually. I trade for him in our league of record. It's all coming back to me. It seems like that was like last year. But yes, I did have Davante Adams in our league of record, and you were kind of talking about how inconsistent he was. But I think you could point that towards the whole Raiders offense, because 1 week Josh Jacobs would be the entire offense. The dude would have 25 touches, all the yards, and he'd have 2 touchdowns. And then Davante Adams was just kind of getting like 5-6 catches and doing all the brunt work, and Jacobs would run it in. But then there were weeks where the run would get shut down, and that's when Davante Adams had those 30-point games that you're like, oh, hell yeah, like where have those been? And he did go on, like a 5-6 week stretch in the middle of the season where you're like, oh my God, this is great. Like this is what I expect out of Davante Adams. But when you needed him most in the playoffs, he kind of shit the bed, man. Yeah. Week 15, week 16, he went where the Raiders offense went, and that was right down the shitter. So my biggest question mark with Davante Adams is obviously everybody's question: who's going to throw him the ball next year? And can he stay healthy? Those are my 2 big questions, because he is a aging wide receiver. He's turning 30 years old. And he's usually missing time with ankle or foot injuries. This was the only year he has not missed time in the past 6 years. So we'll
It was
see
the
what
desert heat, baby.
Yeah, the desert heat saved him, I guess. But we'll see what father time does to him this year, and then who throws him the ball.
If it's Aaron Rodgers, is he still top 5 wide receiver for me? Aaron Rodgers is rumored to be one of the landing spots, the Raiders' landing spots. Is he a
He's
top
got to
5?
be.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. If Rodgers goes to Las Vegas, Devontae Adams is easily a top 5 wide receiver for me. Like we've seen the bond and the chemistry that they have on the field together, and I think they'll just pick up right where they left off. But
Okay.
if they get like Jimmy G,
Mm.
I might be saying something different.
That's fair. I have been very vocal that I don't like Jimmy G and I don't think he's a good quarterback. So I agree with you. But I think if Aaron Rodgers goes there, I think Devontae Adams is still a really great own. Devontae Adams actually finished. He was the 4th wide receiver overall, so he finished as the 3rd. You see, you're starting to see a trend here, the stacks. So one guy misses, and then everybody else follows suit right behind him. That's been the case thus far. Devontae Adams, he was the 202, so right on that, right out of the edge of first round. But he finished as wide receiver 3, and he was wide receiver 4 off the board. So who finished in Devontae Adams' stead? It's none other than Stephon Diggs. He finished with 18.9 points per game. He did play all 17 games, and he was the 204 off the board. So Stephon Diggs was the 5th overall wide receiver off the board, and he finished as the 4th. So, I don't know how much narrative needs to be spun here. You got Josh Allen. There was some early concerns about a Gabe Davis breakout season. I think knowing what we know now, those were silly thoughts. And for those that were riding the Gabe Davis train, they probably promptly got off board after this year.
Shame on us.
But you didn't see it, right? And so there is some, Stephon Diggs at the end of the Bills postseason. He showed some frustration, and he kind of did the same thing with the Vikings when they weren't winning. I don't think Stephon Diggs goes anywhere. I don't think there's anywhere else for Stephon Diggs to go that would give him just as good of a chance to make a Super Bowl push as the Bills. I think the Bills, coaching-wise, need to get their poops in a group, and we've had that conversation before. But Stephon Diggs, I think, is he a top 5 wide receiver for you going into next year? And this is early, and this could change, but just initial conversation.
Yeah. As long as they have Josh Allen there in the offense, like there's no reason for me not to take Diggs as a top 5 wide receiver. Like he is the target machine in that offense, and he's going to get all the looks. So with that kind of volume, he saw 166 targets this year. Like that's obviously attractive, and it's hard to fade. So yeah, easily. I hope he figures out his little temper tantrums, but if that's the only weakness to Stephon Diggs, then I'll take it. But, the only other thing to note, too, is that he's 29 years old. So health might start creeping up to him a little bit.
Yeah. And, same thing with Hill and Cooper Kupp, as we've talked about, that the Father Time himself will tell the whole story. I'm curious to know, or not curious to know, but I do want to point out that, Stephon Diggs, we talk about his temper tantrum, so to speak. I actually kind of like it. I'm just going to be completely honest. I like the fact that he got upset because this is, as I've said on a previous episode before, this game is an emotional sport. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he cares that much that he wants to win. Now, if this was just a regular season game and they ended up losing to the Raiders, no offense, I'd be like, okay, come on, dude. Like, what are you doing here? Like, yeah, you lost a game, but it's not the end of the world. But like, you care enough. This is to go to the next round and have a chance at a ring. And so like, yeah, I would be upset too. Look, I'm not an NFL player, but I don't know how I would react. Did I like to see it like in the way the media took it and ran? Maybe not necessarily, but like, I don't hate the fact that he is not accepting mediocrity and he wants to win. So I do like that in a weird, twisted kind of way. I kind of like the fact that he got upset, and I just wanted to point that out. If you drafted Stephon Diggs, you weren't disappointed. As I mentioned, he finishes the wide receiver 4. However, he was the wide receiver 5 drafted. So who finishes the wide receiver 5? That would be none other than Mr. CeeDee Lamb himself. Finished with 17.7 points per game. And he did play all 17 games. He was 209 off the board. So getting close to that 3rd round. there was some skepticism with CeeDee Lamb going into the year, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that I was drinking the Kool-Aid of somebody who was a little skeptical of CeeDee Lamb, in large part because Amari Cooper was no longer in this offense. He was traded to the Browns for pennies. And then you have Michael Gallup, who at the beginning of the season was dealing with recovering ACL, I want to say it was.
Yeah.
And so he wasn't going to be ready for the first couple weeks. So what does CeeDee Lamb look like in an offense where he is the wide receiver one? Because the year previously, we got to see like a little sprinkle of it, but we really didn't truly get to see CeeDee Lamb drawing the big coverage from the big names on the defensive side of the ball. There was some concern there for me. It turns out it was a silly concern because CeeDee Lamb did finish as the wide receiver 5.
Yep, he made you eat your fucking words, man.
I ate crow. And that's fine. I'm okay doing that. I'm curious. The Cowboys need help at wide receiver, right? Like
Yes.
they need help in a lot of different areas, I think, and I'm sure we'll cover that in the offseason. Obviously, and it looks like they're going to restructure Zeke's contract, which is absolutely necessary for them. Tony Pollard has looked like the better running back in that backfield. Tony Pollard is now a free agent with a torn, beat-up leg, so there is a chance he could come back wearing the Cowboys uniform. Their offensive line is getting older. I mean, I could go down this road, but they need help at wide receiver, right? So, like, if they get another wide receiver in this offseason, does that maybe sway anything for you? Maybe for CeeDee Lamb to fall a little bit? And I'm not saying he's not top 10 because he's probably still going to be a top 10, but, like, do you think he might fall a little bit if they get another decent wide receiver in that room?
I guess it kind of depends on what the other player's skill set is, because if the Dallas were to add another wide receiver, they could potentially complement CeeDee Lamb's skills, maybe like a vertical threat would suffice and, alleviate some pressure off CeeDee Lamb. But I think this year we really saw CeeDee Lamb shine in that wide receiver 1 role. And they know that he's going to be their guy for the next 4 years at least, or 2 to 3 years are left on his contract actually, but they'll probably restructure him and keep him as their top wide receiver because he showed that he can do it. Not only are his stats great, but his route running looked great. He was constantly beating top defenders and he made it look easy at times. So I personally don't have any concerns after seeing CeeDee Lamb tear up top cornerbacks, top defensive backs this year, and I don't see why you can't do it again next year with Dak fully healthy. And we have to keep in mind too that CeeDee Lamb, he survived the Cooper Rush games for 3, 4, 5 weeks, however long that was. So
there was a rumor that Cooper Kupp, like fans were kind of like pushing to maybe have Cooper Kupp as the guy moving forward in Dak's place.
Fools.
So yeah, no, that's a great point, and one that I forgot to mention. Yeah, there was a point where he didn't even have his starting quarterback, and he still finished as good as he did. Who you should have drafted instead of CeeDee Lamb at the 6th overall was none other than AJ Brown. So AJ Brown, he finished with 17.6 points per game. AJ Brown also finished with 17. He played all 17 games. He was drafted in the 308. So a round later is when AJ Brown was drafted. He was the 10th wide receiver off the board. There was some concern with AJ Brown as well, right? And we could explore that slightly. AJ Brown was traded to the Eagles this offseason. So he lost Ryan Tannehill, which looking back very obviously is not a loss, but he was being hyper targeted by his quarterback because he was the only wide receiving threat for the Titans. He goes to the Eagles, where they already have a pretty stout team, to be honest with you. Jalen Hurts, the year previous did not look wonderful from Jalen Hurts, but there were signs of greatness, right? You have Devontae Smith there. You have Dallas Goedert there. You have Miles Sanders. So, like, can Jalen Hurts throw the ball effectively? That was kind of the narrative that was being spun last offseason. So A.J. Brown goes there, and you're like, can he get the ball down the field? Can he move the ball? Very obviously, Jalen Hurts can move the ball with his feet, but can he get it done with his arm? That's where the concern lied with A.J. Brown. And it turns out, Yeti, he can sling the ball.
Yeah.
And he could run the ball.
Yeah.
He can do it both. So A.J. Brown, that was kind of the fear for a lot of people, is there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. Will A.J. Brown live in a role for fantasy football purposes where he can be useful on a week-to-week basis?
And not only did he live, but he had a career season. he had 150 targets, 95 receptions, over 1,500 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. All those stats right there are career best. And we were going into the season wondering how him and Devonta Smith would coexist in that offense. And not only did they coexist, but as we'll get to a little bit later, they both finished in the top 10 and they both looked dominant. Here we were saying that A.J. Brown might suffer because he's not the number one guy anymore in the Tennessee Titans offense. He might be a number two, or he might not be as hyper targeted in the Eagles offense, but he finished with the most targets in that offense and he dominated when he did go get those targets. So I'm excited for A.J. Brown going forward in the Eagles offense, obviously, and Devonta Smith. But man, dude, the Titans look stupid for letting A.J. Brown go last offseason and not paying him.
Yeah, they traded him to acquire Treylon Burks, and it has not looked
surprise, not a good idea.
Great. Yeah, like it just hasn't looked great. It has not been a good look for them, and we'll see what happens in the coming years. He struggled to stay healthy. Treylon Burks has struggled to stay healthy, and there's been Malik Willis has kind of entered the conversation, but looks like a pretty foolish move. And in fact, after the Eagles played the Titans and A.J. Brown steamrolled the Titans, the general manager got fired, or the general manager of the Titans got fired. So kind of maybe coming full circle a little bit, but A.J. Brown is who you should have drafted in the 6th overall wide receiver spot instead of CeeDee Lamb. Tyreek Hill finished he was the 7th wide receiver off the board at the 301. We already covered Tyreek Hill. He finishes the wide receiver 2. So if you drafted Tyreek Hill at the beginning of the 3rd round, you had to be pretty happy. You had to be pretty excited about that. But Yeti, who you should have drafted instead of Tyreek Hill.
Can I take this one? Because
Go ahead.
I said some mean things about St. Brown.
Go ahead. No, take it. No, go ahead.
So the true wide receiver 7 that you should have drafted was Amon-Ra St. fucking Brown. The dude had 267.6 fantasy points, 16.7 points per game. Played 16 games, and you could have got him in the 7th round, people. Foolish Yeti. If only I could go back in time and re-say everything that I said about St. Brown in the offseason, I would. Here I was in the offseason saying that St. Brown, he got lucky towards the end of last year because Swift was out, because Hawkinson was out, and that St. Brown was only seeing targets because those two guys were out. Man, am I a freaking idiot?
Okay. First and foremost, I'm not wearing a hat, but if I had a hat, I'd take it off to you for acknowledging your wrongdoings. That takes a big man to do that. So I appreciate you coming out with the truth there. I don't think you were foolish, though. Because Amon-Ra kind of at the middle end of the 2021 campaign kind of started like going off a little bit. And it was like you didn't know because there was all those injuries involved. Now, DeAndre Swift, he struggled to stay healthy all this year too, right? So there could be a narrative there. They traded away Hawkinson. So once again, he's in a very similar situation. Very obviously, though, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a talent. He is a talented wide receiver. He will be a top 10 drafted wide receiver next year. And I think there's a good reasoning behind it. And you got an extreme value for him at the 7th round, because there was a lot of risk concern. The Lions are going to suck. Jared Goff's his quarterback. They're going to be terrible. It was a mistake it was an anomaly that he had a great end of year run the year previous. I think he squashed all those haters. And I think Amon-Ra is here to stay. And I think he's probably going to be in top 10 conversation. My question for you, Yeti, is Jameson Williams.
Yep, I was going to do the same exact thing to you.
I know. So I wanted to jump in front of it. So you have to answer first. Jameson Williams, for you guys who don't know, he was the rookie wide receiver drafted by the Lions. We didn't really get to see him this year. So he was drafted by the Lions, them knowing that he had an ACL tear. He spreads the field. He is a deep threat kind of guy. We did not get to see him utilized very often in this offense because he came back at the very end of the year. And even the Lions came out and said the same thing. And they say, we really haven't unlocked Jameson Williams. This upcoming year is more of a Jameson Williams rookie year for me. And I don't know if you share that same mentality. This is his true rookie year. Do you have some concerns there drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown, knowing that they have another very talented wide receiver coming out?
No, not really. As I kind of alluded to with CD Lamb, there can be other wide receivers that coexist and actually complement these wide receivers, such as St. Brown or CD Lamb. Because Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you look at his average depth of target, it was 6.7 yards. So he's getting the ball pretty quickly and short range, whereas Jameson Williams, he's going to take the tops off defenses, So I think having Jameson Williams on the field for a full season is only going to benefit St. Brown, because if I see Jameson Williams and he's running a go route 20, 30 yards down the field, I'm like, oh, fuck. And I forget about St. Brown, So I think it can only benefit St. Brown.
Okay. Well, look, as a pseudo Lions fan, I'm all on board.
Top 10 offense next year?
They're going to the playoffs. I'm telling you right now, the Lions are a playoff contending team next year, so watch out for it.
We have to go to the casino and put money on it.
I will 100% do that. I will feel very confident doing that. Wide receiver 8 off the board that everybody drafted was none other than Deebo Samuel at the 303. Deebo did not finish in the top 10. He didn't finish in the top 20. Yet he did not finish in the top 30 for wide receivers. Deebo Samuel finished wide receiver 38 on the year. He finished with 13 points per game, but the narrative here that we could spin, he only played for 13 games, so he did struggle to stay healthy. Not a good look, though, for Deebo Samuel. Not a good look at all. And I don't know how to approach the future, and I haven't given it enough thought yet. There's a lot stewing on this 49ers team. A lot. So, very obviously, Christian McCaffrey was traded to the 49ers, this year. So, you get another top-tier talent there. Brandon Ayuk has looked very good in this offense when they use him. You have George Kittle. Deebo, he got hurt. He struggled to stay healthy, and Deebo's kind of been a utility player for them, where he'll put him at running back, they'll put him at receiver, they'll line him out wide. Like, they do a lot of different things with him. Trey Lance, their quarterback, towards ACL very early on. And so then you bring Jimmy G back, who also got hurt. So then you bring in their third string quarterback, Brock Purdy, who ends up becoming Mr. Relevant very fucking quickly. There's a lot going on in this offense. And Kyle Shanahan, and you know what? I appreciate Kyle Shanahan for his coaching style, because he makes it very difficult for defenses to the matchups. It's a matchup nightmare because there's so many talented people on this roster. The biggest question right now is who is going to be playing for quarterback for the 49ers next year. And I think that is a portion of Deebo Samuel. Where does he end up ADP wise? Now, I don't know if Deebo Samuel is a top 10. I think he's right out of top 10.
Yep. But
I don't see him in the top 10 category anymore, because there is so many mouths to feed in this offense. And we don't know who the quarterback is. So there's some skepticism for me, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on this.
I ate crow with St. Brown, and now I have to flex a little bit, because I remember in the offseason, I did not want anything to do with Deebo Samuel. And the reason being was, in 2021, we saw Deebo utilize a lot in the running back role. And that's what made him so attractive, because he was a running back that was playing wide receiver. Dude was getting the ball in short yardage situations and running it in, doing a shit ton of end arounds, like whatever the case may be, they were getting him the ball and he was the guy. In the offseason, I said he will not stay healthy with all the volume that he saw. He's 27 years old. If he keeps on taking those hits in the middle, if he keeps on taking the hits at the line of scrimmage, he's going to feel those and they're going to add up. Like, he can't be on the field every snap like he was in 2021. And sure enough, he did not see the volume that he saw in 2021 as far as carries or touchdowns, and he did get hurt. So with all that being said, Deebo Samuel going forward is still going to be a fade for me. For all the reasons that you kind of alluded to, is that there are more weapons now with Christian McCaffrey, and they realize how they can use Brandon Ayuk and also Trey Lance. If he is the guy, he is a mobile quarterback, and he's going to take some of those rushing TDs away. He's going to take some of those rushing situations away from Debo. But I just think it's going to be harder and harder to get him the ball, and he's not going to be as hyper targeted as he once was, or hyper utilized like he once was. And it's hard for me to trust a guy in the top 10 who's not getting the volume like that anymore.
Yeah, I think there's a valid argument to be had there. So top 15.
I could see it. Yeah. His ADP will definitely be in that top, I would say probably top 13 range going into the off season.
But
It's
you still
probably
fade.
it. Yeah, but I'm still fading Debo.
Okay. Well, I know for a fact we're going to have some more conversations about this down the road. So, but let's move on. Yeti, who you should have drafted, who I screamed from the rooftops.
Flex daddy.
Joke. That's a joke. I did not. Wide receiver 8 on the year. He should have been drafted at the 303 instead of Debo Samuel. Instead, he was drafted 508 is none other than Jalen Waddle, finishing with 15.3 points per game throughout 17 games. Jalen Waddle was kind of scary. He was a scarier draft pick because Tyreek Hill enters the situation. Can they both live simultaneously? Jalen Waddle was the wide receiver 1 for this team, and now he's pushed out to wide receiver 2. Can he handle the workload and still find fantasy relevance? Very clearly, he can. Both Dolphins wide receivers finished in the top 10 with everything that we talked about with Hill as far as the quarterback situation and the problems facing there. They still found reasons to be relevant. Jalen Waddle's a generational talent as well. You want to talk about Justin Jefferson? Yes, Justin Jefferson very clearly is. Jalen Waddle's another one of those guys. He's able to find success. He's fast. Speed kills. It's a real thing. You should have drafted him, Yeti, and that was a joke. I did not say that. I was not screaming because I had the fears just like the people did. But for those that took a chance on Jalen Waddle in the 508, you were very happy with the production that you got out of Jalen Waddle. So congratulations to those guys.
Yeah, and it's funny because I said Tyreek Hill is the yak king earlier when we were talking about him, but Jalen Waddle actually had more yards after the catch than Tyreek did, which is a testament to how good of a wide receiver Jalen Waddle is, because he's a wide receiver 2 in that offense.
Yeah,
that's insane to say. Like, you could put Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle up against any other combination in the league and say that is the best duo.
I want to see him race.
That would be fun. Now, that's what the Pro Bowl should be.
Bingo. I agree. Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill racing.
That's all I want to see.
Guys. Yeah. Who's fastest? Just squash the arguments, show up, race. That's what I would love to see. They're both incredibly fast, and Jalen Waddle is a talent. I can see Jalen Waddle. Here's my thing, right? I don't like to stack. I don't like stacking 2 wide receivers from the same team. It's a very scary thing, and usually it doesn't work out for you. Jalen Waddle, I don't know if he's in the top 10 for me next year. I mean, very obviously he finished out this year. I think he's right outside of it. And this is very premature, but just having this premature conversation, I think Jalen Waddle's just outside of the top 10 for me.
As far as ADP goes?
Yeah, like 12th overall wide receivers, kind of where I picture him at. Just due to the fact that Tyreek Hill's still going to be there. And I could be wrong. But like just this initial conversation, I'm still a little scared. I don't know why.
Yeah, I think you have every right to feel that concern. It's crazy that Jalen Waddle finished as a wide receiver 8, but I think if Tua would have stayed healthy, he might have finished in the top 5 as a wide receiver, honestly, because you can look at when Tua got hurt, when he got his brain scrambled, and you can look at Jalen Waddle's stats and be like, holy shit, like Jalen Waddle needed Tua to have that fantasy relevance or to have that production. And if Tua would have played, I fully think that Jalen Waddle would be a top 5 wide receiver. So, with that being said, in my opinion, I think
next year
he'll give it a go until he gets one more concussion, and then it's probably game over. But with Jalen Waddle's ADP next year, I could see him being a top 10 guy. Because this next guy that we're going to talk about, I don't think he's going to finish in the top 10 ADP or fantasy next year.
I agree with that. And that next person is Mike Evans, who was the 9th wide receiver drafted off the board at the 306. Mike Evans is a quick fade. And I completely agree with you. I don't see Mike Evans being a top 10 guy next year. Yet he finished as wide receiver 17 on the year. So you weren't really happy you had Mike Evans. You weren't necessarily like he's still wide receiver 2, but you drafted him with the intention of him being a wide receiver 1, and you did not get that. Mike Evans played 15 games. He finished with 15 points per game. You didn't get the production you were hoping for out of Mike Evans, and or I don't want to talk about Chris Godwin a whole lot, but like this whole offense really did not produce nearly as well as anybody had hoped it would. Tom Brady is retired. Mike Evans is, I think he's on, I'd have to go look at his contract again. I don't have that off the top of my head, but I think he's still under contract with the Bucs. Currently, their quarterback is Kyle Trask. Maybe he tries to force himself out, but he just did not look like the Mike Evans that we had come to expect. And I don't know if I don't trust, much like you just alluded to, I don't trust him in the top 10 going into next year, and I would not feel comfortable drafting him there. He struggled with injury. He struggled to stay healthy. What are your thoughts on Mike Evans?
Yeah, and even when he was on the field, he was dropping balls that he should have been catching, man. I think he was getting memed almost every other weekend because he was dropping balls that could have been like 60-yard touchdowns. And if he catches those, we're talking about Mike Evans as he probably finished as a wide receiver 10 or in the top 10, I should say. Mike Evans, he is 29 years old. And he actually has.
Does he have a potential out?
Three more years on his contract. But he has 2 more. He has an out in 2025. But by that time, who knows?
He's probably done. He's kind of like
play.
You might get the AJ Green treatment where he just goes off into the sunlight with another team.
That's actually a pretty decent comparison. Now that I think about it, because AJ Green, he was fun to watch with the Bengals. He was relevant for a while, and then he just kind of faded off into the sunset.
That's what.
But my question to you is, if Mike Evans does leave Tampa Bay, let's say he goes to a contender, I don't know who, does that make him any more attractive to you, or is he still a fade?
I think it would depend on where he goes. I think that's really like if he went to the Chiefs.
Yeah.
I'd still fade him if he went to the Chiefs. Well, there's a lot going on there, right? If Travis Kelce retires, who becomes the pseudo wide receiver 1 for that team? Because as we talked about at the beginning of the episode, Juju and MVS are like both outside of the top 20. So
Chargers.
It gets interesting. If he goes to the Chargers, that would be a good home for him because that whole team struggles to stay healthy, so he'd fit right in. I don't know. Out of the top 10, I probably still would draft in the top 10 now, especially at the Chargers, because you've still got Keenan Allen and Mike Williams there, who are aging assets, but that just adds another piece to the puzzle of who's going to eat, who's going to get hurt in any given week. So I don't know.
Last one, Giants.
You bastard. Top 15.
Okay. Yeah, I like
15.
that.
Top 15. I love Brian Dable's going to find a way to get the ball into his playmaker's hand. Now, whether he catches it or not is a different story. But I have a lot of respect for Brian Dable and what he's able to do with his players, and for that reason, I would. Like I said, it depends on where he goes, and if he stays with the Bucs, they got to figure out the quarterback. No. Yeah, he's like almost outside of the top 20 for me, and that really depends on who's throwing him the ball this next season, but. Bucks they have a lot of problems that are coming up. And for Bucks fans, I think you had your run and you're starting to, you're going to pay the piper and you're going to have to kind of rebuild quite a bit because your team's.
Welcome back to reality, guys.
Yeah. Tom Brady retired. So yeah, it's a tough finish. And who you should have drafted instead of Mike Evans is probably, it is the best value you could have gotten out of anybody in this entire draft was Devontae Smith. So Devontae Smith finishes wide receiver 9 on the year. He got 15 points per game. He played all 17 games. Devontae Smith was drafted. Yeti, I'm going to grab my mic and I'm going to put it very close to my mouth. 908. He was almost drafted in the 10th round.
My goodness, man.
And he finishes a wide receiver 9 on the year. What incredible value. Like we talked about, the Eagles. I mean, they're in the Super Bowl. We know they're a great team, but there was a lot of speculation in this offseason. A.J. Brown, comes in. Devontae Smith is a fade because he's not going to have relevance. Dallas Goedert is an incredible tight end, and he's going to be eating. They're going to run the ball a lot with Miles Sanders. So Devontae Smith is going to be absolutely worthless. And guess what? He's a top 10 wide receiver, baby. So, and I'm curious as to your thoughts here because Devontae Smith was good. He was good. You were happy you had him. But we kind of got to see a little bit more out of him when Dallas Goedert was off the field. Do you think that plays any relevance as to why he finished where he did?
Maybe a little, but I think even before that point, you clearly saw where that offense was and what their identity was. They're going to pound the rock, but then the field is going to be so open because you have AJ Brown providing a lot of room, taking a lot of coverage, and that leaves a talented Heisman-winning candidate like Devontae Smith to go out there and flourish. And he really shined this year, man. We all thought that he would take a step back because the volume's not going to be there this year. Well, he actually saw 145 targets and 103 catches this year, which is quite a bit more than he saw last year when he was the true wide receiver one on that offense. So he proved that he's here to stay. And during the Super Bowl interviews this week, AJ Brown was saying that they are truly wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 1B. And I agree with AJ Brown saying that. And I think that's how you should approach it next season as well. So I'm hoping Devonta Smith's ADP is lower next year because, I mean, I would take Devontae Smith's value over AJ Brown if AJ Brown is going in like the first round or two. Because I bet you Devonta Smith is like a wide receiver or probably in the 5th or 6th round.
I could see that 100%, but he finished as a top 10 guy. So it's very interesting. And people are going to say it was a fluke. It wasn't supposed to happen.
They're going to say Dallas Goedert.
Yeah.
They're going to say Dallas Goedert was out. And so that's why Devontae Smith was good. But no, I mean, if you watch Devontae Smith play football, be like, holy shit, that is a really good wide receiver. I want that dude on my team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned AJ Brown. He was the 10th overall wide receiver, so he was the last of the group here. He was picked up in 308, so almost approaching the 4th round. And we've already talked about AJ Brown. He finishes a wide receiver 6 on the year, so you got value out of that. So congratulations. But who you should have drafted as the 10th overall wide receiver? Amari Cooper, who is kind of looking back, it's not surprising, but like if we would have had this conversation knowing what we know and said, oh, Amari Cooper's going to finish as the top 10 wide receiver, we probably, like going into preseason last year, we would have laughed in your face. Amari Cooper finished with 14.5 points per game. He played all 17 games. Amari Cooper was drafted in the 8th round.
That's crazy.
Into the 8th. Amari Cooper played for the Cowboys last year. The Cowboys sold him for pennies on the dollar to the Browns. He's an old wide receiver. He's washed up. He's not going to have the value. And guess what he did? He was a staple for this Browns organization when they played at home with Jacoby Brissett as their quarterback. Jacoby Brissett brought value to Amari Cooper. He lived with Jacoby Brissett for the first, 12 weeks of the season before they swapped to Deshaun Watson, and he still managed with a quarterback change to finish in the top 10. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. You know, what would be funny is if we average out his home fantasy points versus his away and see where he would have finished in the top 10 if he played like he did at home on the road. But, you bring up a good point because we only saw Deshaun Watson play for a handful of games this year. So I'm really curious to see what this offense looks like with Deshaun Watson at the helm for a full season. Are they going to be throwing the ball more? Are they going to be I just don't know. I have so many questions for that offense going forward. It's going to be interesting. And now Kareem Hunt's probably going to be gone from that offense as well. Not saying he did a whole lot this season, but that opens up potential targets for Amari Cooper. And then we did see Peoples-Jones kind of flourish when Watson came back. So I wonder if DPJ is going to get a little more of a role going into next year. How are you feeling about Cooper next year?
The Browns almost made this worse because they left us with more questions than answers. And that to me is it's frustrating, right? Because you don't know. And you expect, like, if Deshaun Watson, and nobody was necessarily expecting this, but if Deshaun Watson came out and looked like Deshaun Watson when he played with the Texans and he had DeAndre Hopkins, the answers would have been like very evident. But back then he was playing with Will Fuller and DeAndre Hopkins, and it was just different. It was a different time. He was younger. He was not removed from the NFL for 2 years. So coming into this, we kind of knew, okay, he's not going to be great. But does he have the little spark that we're hoping for to see that there's still a lot of gas left in that tank? At times, maybe he showed a little spark, but realistically, he kind of looked like he was out of it. And he hadn't played in 2 years. You get thrown into week 12, which makes it incredibly difficult for him because at the start of the season, everybody's fresh, everybody's new, everybody's getting reacclimated. And I don't mean just offensively, but I mean defenses as well. NFL defenses, this is their first game back. They're getting reacquainted into things, getting back to game speed. By week 12, you're already there, right? And so Deshaun Watson just gets thrown into this 2 years removed, playing against defenses that are in the prime of their season. That makes it really difficult. So I don't know where we go from here. I think Amari Cooper, I don't see him being in the top 10.
No.
But is he in the top 24? Absolutely. Yeah. Like he's a top 24 wide receiver. You mentioned Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he becomes very interesting for me because he was seeing a lot more usage with Deshaun Watson at the helm. Donovan Peoples-Jones is a young guy. He's a young, talented wide receiver. I am interested to see. Now, is Donovan Peoples-Jones going to be a top 24? I don't think he will be ADP.
No,
but
I don't think so.
He's somebody who could get you potential value and finish in the top 24.
He might be my Christian Kirk guy going into.
He very well could, and I love that analogy because he is somebody who kind of fits that mold a little bit. Now, obviously, he didn't get as big of a contract as Christian Kirk, but he's kind of the sneaky late round addition that could provide a lot of fantasy relevance early on. So, Deshaun Watson this offseason, I think. My bold predict they are going to throw the ball a lot more. I think the Browns historically, you mentioned Kareem Hunt's going to leave. The Browns are known to slam the ball down your throat.
Yep. With
Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Both of those guys are aging. Kareem Hunt, 90% will not be in a Browns uniform next year because he wants to get paid. I understand that. But I think that's why they got Deshaun Watson is because he's able to offer he's multi-talented in that way, like a Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts, where Deshaun Watson can scramble, extend plays with his feet, get the ball out of his hands on the move. We saw him do it with the Texans. The problem was we really didn't get to see a large sample size of it this year, but we still they showed, in my mind, because I watched a couple of their games just to kind of see what was going on. They kind of started to show that they wanted to throw the ball more. And so I think we're going to maybe see a little bit more of that going into next season, but we'll certainly be, much like everything else, we'll be having some off-season fantasy conversations about it, but that's my initial thoughts towards it.
Yeah, I agree with you on that front. It's going to be interesting to kind of watch Nick Chubb unfold as well because he is getting older. He's not going to be he's going to be the only running back, so I'm curious if he can kind of sustain that volume and stay healthy. We'll see. But if I could get Amari Cooper as, like you said, in the top 24, so he'd be a wide receiver 2. If I could get him as my wide receiver 2, I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so, and it's going to be largely determined upon where his ADP is. That's going to be the detrimental factor in all of this conversation because if they put him at the 14th overall ADP, there are some league mates that we play with that I'm sure a lot of people play with who use ADP as a detrimental factor, and then he gets grabbed there, and then you're like, okay, well, no harm, no foul. But his ADP is going to be largely determined upon kind of how I view him from a value standpoint moving into next season. So
let me ask you this real quick. Amari Cooper or Mike Evans?
Oh, geez. It's got to be Cooper. At this current juncture, it has to be Amari Cooper. Mike Evans doesn't have a quarterback. He's playing with Kyle Trask, so it has to be Amari Cooper for me. Now, I agree. That could change depending upon some movement in the NFL this offseason, but at this current juncture, I'm going to take Cooper.
Yeah. So I'll work on a harder question in the offseason.
Who are you taking, Cooper or Evans?
Oh, it's easy. It's Cooper. Okay. But if Evans goes to the Giants, I'm probably taking Evans.
Okay, I would probably agree with you there. Just because I love Brian Dable and I have respect for him.
He's my coach.
All right. He is your coach. And that's it. That is the top wide receiver ADP versus finishes, as well as the Super Bowl predictions. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. My last piece that I'd like to touch on here just very briefly, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, go listen to our award show for our 100th episode. It was an absolute blast. I guarantee you're going to laugh. And if you're drinking any sort of drink, it might come out of your nose because there's some completely absurd things that are being said in there. It was a good time. We had the whole team, and it was in celebration of our 100th episode. Don't miss it. Go follow us on all the socials. And if you're not already, go subscribe to our Substack. It is on a link on all of our social media platforms. You will get curated content straight to your mailbox, your inbox. We're not mailing. We're sending emails. So I just want to clear the air. We're not going to go drop shit in your mailbox, but it is your inbox for your email. So go sign up there. It's free. It's free content. It is free information, hot takes. We'll be doing a lot of fantasy football conversations in the offseason, and it will hit your inbox. So go do that. And that's it. Yeti, am I missing anything?
Enjoy the Super Bowl, my friends.
Amen, brother. You as well. Have fun in San Francisco. For those that are listening in San Fran, tweet Yeti. Tell them a good place to go watch the game.
Please do.
And that's it. We
are
out.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leather Brains. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and leaving a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app and YouTube, as well as following us at Leather Brains on Twitter and Instagram. If you're looking for specific fantasy advice, including draft advice, trade insight, starts and sits, or even if you want our thoughts on your sports bets, please feel free to send us a DM on Twitter for an answer and a chance to have your question featured on a future episode. Again, thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back before you know it.